My name's Shayon, partner on the investment team at Multicoin. I want to talk about the demand side in some depth today. So before we start, I think it's worth kind of checking in to where we're at as a sector. And so this is a slide I created for Multicoin's LP Summit last September in 2023. And I was talking about how token incentivized networks are great at inverting the cost structure for building out physical infrastructure projects. Handful of names here, I'm sure we missed a few, but when you compare this to this market map I found on Masari 2 days ago, there are substantially more names here. This is awesome. This is exactly what we need. And I think it's special because DePINs as a sector, this class of applications, this new business model, is singular in crypto. It is singularly enabled by permissionless value transfer. It is singularly creating new forms of productive capital that we haven't seen before. And it's incumbent on us, everyone in this room, everyone in that room, everyone to make sure that this is successful. And so it's worth trying to ask what success means in that case. And so I think you generally find when you look at these networks, the supply side is great, right? Like when you look at sort of this is a handful of compute networks and energy networks and storage networks. If you give people the incentive to onboard and you tell them that there are rewards for you at the end of it, people will become part of it. And we've shown that, tens of thousands of resources aggregated. When you look at the demand side, unfortunately, it's a sort of a less rosy picture. And this is courtesy of the guys at EV3. The numbers here are a little bit smaller than the ones you were seeing on the screen before this. But really the problem is the gap between the y-axes on these two charts. They're off by a few orders of magnitude. We got to change that. We have to find a way to bridge that gap and close that spread somehow. And so what I want to try and do before I jump into specific tactical advice on doing this, if you are building a network right now, whether you have a token or not, you can use points every time I say tokens here. That works too. It's worth sort of examining from sort of a first principle what it is that you're building. And I think one thing that we've observed is that most networks are marketplaces, and most marketplaces are networks. There are obviously exceptions in the middle. But networks have marketplace effects, and marketplaces have network effects. The thing that matters when you're building a marketplace is not just having a ton of supply-side inventory. What you really care about is liquidity. What you care about is making sure that as you scale up your supply side, you are building meaningful, sticky, compounding, retentive demand to utilize what you've created so far. There's a really good blog post from James Currier at NFX that kind of describes how the dynamics work. A lot of these products here have, they're ostensibly marketplaces, or they're ostensibly networks. But the real center of gravity in what you're building here is creating that liquidity that's sort of two-sided. And so the thesis that we've sort of shown in the last few years is that tokens are a way to bootstrap supply-side infrastructure and resource capacity. And sort of the English language version of that is if you give people tokens to contribute to a network in a simple capacity, they will do that. I think the antithesis, the DePIN skeptics in the room, what they'll say is that what you've essentially done is created these pools of resources that don't have the right structures and incentives and mechanisms in place for people to tap into those in a productive capacity. And so the thing, when you combine those two, is that when you give people tokens, they will do things. So make sure you're doing the right things. You're asking them to do the right things. And so the practical kind of implication of that is instead of just routing your rewards to building out supply side into a chart that kind of looks like this, what you really want to do is be thoughtful about specific inflection points at which you can opportunistically reroute your emissions and sort of how you think about the most valuable resource you're your most competitive advantage against centralized incumbents or anyone else towards kind of creating that catch up on the demand side. And it's really just that there are obviously nuances, and there's different markets, and there's different structures in terms of what incentivizing demand looks like. But the end goal that I'm trying to drive home is that you should think about the thing you're incentivizing not as supply-side inventory, but as liquidity and sort of general happiness in terms of the market that you're building. And so I'm going to go over sort of high level, a handful of kind of strategies. I'll talk through them really quickly, and then we can go a little bit more in detail about all of them. So the first is just sort of top of funnel. How do people know that you exist? How do you make sure that they are even aware that you have these resources? You can sort of take the playbook from traditional enterprises in terms of affiliates and sales teams, and we can talk a little bit about how we do that. The second is using third parties. Tokens are a superpower. They're also the biggest liability, but they are a superpower. And so you can use tokens to incentivize the creation of new products and new lines of business that you may not have the time or the energy to build. And there are several examples of people doing that, and we'll go into a little bit of detail about that. And the last is my favorite, which is just like, people just do stuff. Like, no matter if you can narrowly define a task enough, someone, and you can create the right reward structure for it, someone on the internet will do the thing that you want them to do. So just sort of be creative about what liquidity looks like. Retention and loyalty. Bonuses, this is a tricky one because it's very easy to sort of fall into the trap of trying to incent demand like with very directly. There are nuanced ways of doing this, and we'll get into that. And stake-driven logging, this is sort of like a fun mechanism I'm working with. So we'll jump into that in a second. I think when you're talking about affiliate programs, BrainTrust is the best example. They've done a phenomenal job, and they do a ton of volume through a referral program. The specifics are not worth going into, but I think that the most important aspects of this are you're not directly incentivizing the customer. You are incentivizing someone who is bringing on a customer. And the notional value of the incentive is substantially lower than the value of the contract. So you have to make sure that the system is EV positive for you at any given state. But as long as you do that, you should be okay. And so you can sort of run with that in different ways. One sort of idea that I've been noodling with, and this sort of applies for virtual infrastructure networks, your storage, your compute, your bandwidth markets. These organizations, your centralized incumbents, have massive sales teams where people carry quotas on their head, and they are spending all day trying to figure out how to sell more product. Most teams in crypto do not have that. But there's no reason that you can't sort of try to create that with incentives. And so what I've outlined here is like something that looks like something that borrows from the Axie Guild model, where you can essentially, the end goal here is to get every salesperson that is selling product somewhere to get super excited about earning tokens and like splashing your front end and your product to any potential customer, and then potentially banding together and trying to get more incentives. There are weird things that you can try in order to increase top of funnel awareness like this. This is just another version of an affiliate program with just sort of tighter incentives. Third parties is, and you've seen examples of this with Helium and BitTensor and Render. This is where if you don't have the time or the energy or the ability to build a product, but you've created some sort of footprint, some threshold infrastructure that someone else can use, someone else can build lines of product that are valuable for someone else. And so, Helium with its sub-DAOs, BitTensor with all of its subnets, Render has a handful of people, building bespoke products, channeling their own demand into those resources, and sort of trying to increase the GMV. The problem with this approach is you don't really own the relationship anymore with the customer. It's fine. It's damn expansionary. It makes things work better. Last is bounties. I need to run through these slides a little bit faster, but bounties, essentially, people will do things if you define the ask narrowly enough. There are tons of examples of this, and we can kind of go into more detail. But as long as you create a specific ask, and you can sort of borrow from like L1 grants and things of that nature for structure, there are really interesting ways to just get people to do things, whether it's find a customer or refer someone else or whatever. Bonuses, giving customers tokens directly. If you can find a way to make your customers somehow contributive to the network in the way that Helium Mobile does, they will, that helps meaningfully as a retention driver if you're getting discounted service in some meaningful capacity. It doesn't work in all cases. It's something to think about. And the last here is just getting your customers to know that the token exists. This is kind of a harder sell, but some sort of mechanism where if someone's on a longer-term contract and you give them a ton of tokens and you ask them to stake them, they wake up in 12 months and are like, wow, I have so much value here. It's this weird mechanism on the demand side that can help with that. It's always network specific. Liquidity does not mean something. It's not a monolith. It depends on what exactly you're building. And this is a good time for me to talk very quickly about what I think are some of the largest markets in DePIN right now. This is a quick search for hardware and services businesses that have raised between $5 and $20 million in the last 3 years across these verticals. These are founders that have built demand-side processes. They know how to acquire customers, and have probably reached, some meaningful percentage of them have probably reached some threshold in terms of capital and attention. The people in this room can help them sort of understand what it's like to transition into crypto capital markets. There is a lot of operational expertise in this room and outside of it. And for every incremental dollar of demand-side revenue that the teams in this room generate, the more legitimized this model becomes for the next wave of companies. And so it's worth thinking about demand side. And if you are interested in any of these ideas, you should email me. Thank you. I don't have time for questions, I don't think.